Before this video begins, I would just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. The Sea Devils. Oh, sorry, I meant Homo Aqua, which actually doesn't make any sense, by the way. Neither does Homo Reptilia, since, Homo means human, and the Silurians and Sea Devils obviously predate humanity, and they're not part of our genus, so that's just a stupid idea. But anyway, the Sea Devils are once again relevant for reasons completely beyond me, getting our whole spin-off slopping onto screens very soon. The Sea Devils are the aquatic cousins of the Silurians, both unique Doctor Who monsters in the sense that they're not alien invaders from the depths of outer space, they're actually Earth natives who believe they own the planet, not us uncivilized apes. Sounds like a classic strong sci-fi concept, right? Well, you'd think. But the Sea Devils, and also the Silurians, are by far the most boring recurring Doctor Who monster of all time. They have a lot of fans to the extent Sea Devils were up there with Susan as a constantly predicted return and regular subject of leaks. Everyone was obsessed with the idea of them returning. But when they did come back, they sucked, because they always have. The Sea Devils are terrible. They suck, they're boring, and here's why. So let's begin at the start, where it all began. For season 7 of Classic Who, the Doctor was exiled to Earth by the Time Lords, reluctantly working alongside UNIT as the show grounded itself to compete with popular shows of the time like The Avengers, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Mission Impossible. It was all about a small team of operatives dealing with espionage, megalomaniacal villains, and, for Doctor Who specifically, alien invasions. For a show that had spent years visiting far-off alien worlds and other time periods, a significant reshaping was required in the scripting department, with two-time Doctor Who writer Malcolm Hulke unsure if such a restriction would work for Doctor Who. But he decided to prove himself wrong with an invasion of creatures from Earth itself, rather than the stars. And thus, Doctor Who and the Silurians was born, seeing UNIT discover a sprawling underground civilization of prehistoric humanoid creatures waking up because of a nuclear reactor and seeking revenge, forcing the Doctor to try and mediate between these two warring races. The story was considered a success, so 2 seasons later, they decided to make a sequel, this time going full Avatar and doing the exact same thing, but just adding water. Before we get to the more currently relevant Sea Devils, let's explore just what makes the Silurians so damn boring as Doctor Who monsters. They've fronted 3 stories across both classic and modern Who, obviously not counting Vastra, but we'll get to her. Again, don't get me wrong, the concept itself is solid, but they've never exactly been interesting. Because that's all they are, a concept. There's only ever been one Silurian story. Humans wake up hibernating Silurians. Hostilities begin and war looms. The Doctor is forced to try and mediate, only for the Silurians to die anyway to maintain continuity, so lizards can't keep running around in modern day society. In all their appearances, Sea Devils included, nothing has ever been done with this concept that truly feels new or interesting. Their entire identity is reduced to, we were here first, we want our planet back, and nothing new or fresh is ever really added to that. And then the characterization of individuals is always identical too. You have the stern military leader and the idealistic peace seeker causing divisions within the faction, and they never feel like distinct entities outside of that. Hell, even the entire race doesn't feel distinct. For such an ancient, advanced species, we rarely ever get to see their actual society or how they function as people. What's their art like? What's their philosophy? What's their technology? Their entire existence begins and ends with just the episodes they appear in. Except yes, I know there's a Silurian arc in Dinosaurs in a Spaceship. That's kind of one of the few reasons the Silurians are kind of better than the Sea Devils, but it'll all make sense in a minute. The Sontarans even have more characterization, and they're a literal clone race. The Silurians just feel so boring and plain. It wouldn't be so bad if they had only appeared in one story, but it's their recurring presence that only serves to illuminate how little they're actually fleshed out. But do you know what is fleshed out? That like, subscribe, and hype. Go on, click them. It takes like 5 seconds, and it pays my bills. Of course, there is one single exception to this rule. Madame Vastra, a Silurian the Ninth Doctor saved off-screen and was introduced in A Good Man Goes to War as a friend of the 11th Doctor. Oh, also, she's gay.
Why are you gay?
Vastra feels almost like a conscious rejection of the Silurians as they had existed for years. Because she has a personality, there's an appreciation of art, the ability to be a detective in a unique setting of Victorian London, and of course, a mix of different personality traits and characteristics beyond simple kill all humans or not all humans are bad. Of course, over time, Vastra loses her novelty and gets flanderized into becoming nothing more than a lizard lesbian from the dawn of time, but she's at least a case study of how the Silurians can be interesting. The Sea Devils, on the other hand, yeah, not so lucky. Even with a whole spin-off that creates a nicely human fish girlfriend for the main male character, Guillermo del Toro could never. If the roles were reversed, you know, Salt would be some horrific eldritch beast women get weak at the knees for. They love those monsters. This is the true female gaze. But back on topic, the Sea Devils are just Silurians of the sea. That's not even a dig at them, that's quite literally their entire premise, but as a result, they have the exact same issues as the Silurians. The lack of characterization, the lack of culture, their repetitive stories. Hell, Legend of the Sea Devils of all things at least tried something new with all the pirate stuff, but it failed in every other aspect, so all the issues of the Silurians are just as prominent for the Sea Devils, making them excruciatingly boring, because it's always the same played out story, again and again. A big problem with Silurian and Sea Devil stories is how they often fall into very ham-fisted and badly executed allegories for things like racism, colonialism, or environmentalism. And don't get me wrong, those are important topics to cover. These stories just never do it well. Neither the Silurians nor the Sea Devils have ever really been in good stories. And again, that's mainly because they're almost always the same. Doctor Who and the Silurians is fine, but it falls into the same trap a lot of Pertwee stories do, where it's just unbearably long and drags. The Silurians also just look way too man in rubber suit like, and move so stunted and awkwardly. The highlight of the story is the Brigadier's genocide at the end, which is very powerful and shows the difference between the Doctor and the Brigadier. But the build-up is inconsistent, and the pacing and effects of the story along the way just don't match such a strong moment. Then you get the Sea Devils, which is basically the same story all over again. A very lazy rehash with a half-hearted attempt at morality and ethics, and the only really interesting element of the story has nothing to do with the titular monsters. It's the Master and his interactions with the Doctor. And again, it's overly long and so padded. So you know, that's 0 out of 2 so far. And next up is Warriors from the Deep, which brings together both Silurians and Sea Devils for an infamously reviled story. The sea base is overly lit with flat studio lighting that explodes. The sea base is overly lit with flat studio lighting that exposes the terrible production values and monster suits. Monsters like the Merker, which is meant to be a big, terrifying creature, but instead ends up a pantomime horse running around looking so goofy, and it's one of the lowest points of Doctor Who monsters. The direction is bad, the action is bad, even the acting is terrible, with the iconic line, "Face it, Tegan, he's drowned!" You know, for context, in case you haven't seen the episode, the Doctor fell in the water literally like 2 seconds before that. Sure, there are a lot of ideas in Warriors from the Deep, like a Cold War allegory, political intrigue, 2 factions of the same race, and the Merker, but nothing ever really feels fleshed out or like it actually breathes. You know, ironic because they're underwater. And also, ironically, it's bad because it's shorter than the predecessors. So, you know, for once it needed more episodes. Oh, and by this point, the 2 races have lost any sense of nuance or character, and are just typical moustache-twirling villains wanting to blow everyone up for the sake of being evil 1980s sci-fi villains, because the script says so. It's abysmal, and considered one of the worst 5th Doctor stories for a very good reason, and it's probably a big part of why the Sea Devils are just so terrible. And then there's the modern era. Even with the decades between stories and the chances for new, different approaches, A Hungry Earth is just a basic remake of the original Silurian story made by everyone's favourite Doctor Who hack fraud, Chris Chibnall. You know, hit the Chibnall alarm, we got Chibnall here. It's a two-parter for God knows what reason. It's overly long and slow, with a very safe and derivative structure, just copying that original beat for beat, without actually adding anything new, really. You know, apart from like the funniest frame in Doctor Who. The character work is terrible, everyone is just black or white without matching the moral debate the episode aims for. There's a boring and safe ending of just kicking the can down the road by delaying any sense of Silurians and humans cohabitating the planet, and anything important or interesting is just pushed away into a hypothetical off-screen future, more interesting than the actual story. Oh, and the redesign is terrible too. The original Silurians looked awful, sure, but the solution wasn't just making them green humans with some scales. That approach really devalues them and makes them infinitely less interesting. And then, last and very much least, is Legend of the Sea Devils. Possibly the worst episode of all of modern Doctor Who. It's a bona fide Chibnall classic. An underwritten story that barely exists with a villain plan that's never explained, cardboard characters including the protagonists themselves, choppy pacing and editing that feels like half the episode was cut out, and visuals aiming for big spectacle but actually massively under-delivering. You know, it actually looks pretty bad, and even has that truly ridiculous Mario backflip. The Sea Devils feel completely pointless and generic aside from that pirate visual. Oh, and then there's the terribly handled Thasmin plot, which, you know, speaks for itself. And last of all, it's supposed to be an Easter special for some reason. Tell me what any of this has to do with Easter? So, as you can see, the Silurians, and especially the Sea Devils, have never even appeared in good stories, which makes their reverence amongst fans even more confusing. But are these episodes bad because of the monsters, or are the monsters bad because of the episodes? Well, I think it's probably more of the latter. I don't think the Sea Devils have been done many favours by being put in episodes that just outright suck. There's plenty you can do with them that these episodes just haven't bothered with. Ages ago I made a video about War Between the Land and the Sea where I suggested using the Sea Devils in a more Lovecraftian Shadow over Innsmouth way, with these powerful creatures in a pact with a human waterfront settlement that sees them like gods. But there are other ideas you can play with too. For a while I've had an idea about a bit of a playful 50s B-movie parody using the Sea Devils as invaders from the deep, terrifying surfers on the Californian beaches of the time period. It'd be a fun way to use them, almost like a play on Creature from the Black Lagoon and other monster movies of the time. Or how about the very common wish of just simply visiting the Silurians and Sea Devils at the height of their power on prehistoric Earth? Grand undersea temples, powerful fleets, vivid flora and fauna on land and sea. There's so much you can play with. I mean, just spend 5 minutes playing Galactic Conquest on Felucia on Battlefront 2. Tell me it wouldn't be cool to have a Doctor Who episode that looks like that. But you know, a little less brown and murky. Lastly, and most relevantly, I'm aware of the changes the War Between the Land and the Sea is making to the Sea Devils. Hell, that's the main reason I'm making this video, because it reminded me of how much I hate the monsters. And don't misconstrue this as me covering the spin-off, because I'm not. It's just what reminded me of them being bad. And I haven't even watched it, I'm not gonna. But you know, it's out in a couple of days, so it's the best time to make this video. Gotta get them clicks. A big part of this story seems to be about a star-crossed romance between human and sea devil. But you know, a sea devil that's made more conventionally attractive in a human male gaze sense, because men are cowards and don't want to bonk weird undersea fish horrific monstrosities. And it makes me think of something that has done that far better than Doctor Who ever could. In the Witcher book Sword of Destiny, one of the stories is A Little Sacrifice. It sees Geralt drawn into the romance between Duke Aglavor and his lover Shinaz, a mermaid. Now, when Netflix adapted this, they just made it an edgy Little Mermaid. But the original story was much more compelling and interesting. Neither Aglavor or Shinaz wanted to transform themselves to live with the other, but Shinaz reluctantly turns herself human to avoid Aglavor going to war with different undersea creatures, in a sacrifice that forces Geralt to confront his own love for Yennefer rather than Essie. It's a great story, and it's very much about a war between the land and the sea with a heart on both sides, an actual moral nuance, because Aglavor isn't a great guy, and he ends up getting what he wants anyway. You could definitely tell a similar story with the Sea Devils, not necessarily in the love interest sense, but as the underwater race being provoked that the Shinaz equivalent mediates with. But again, given how badly Netflix butchered this short story when they made it as an animated movie, I wouldn't trust Doctor Who to do it very well either. But my point remains, there are plenty of routes to take the Sea Devils down. There's so much you can do with them, rather than just the same thing constantly. Give us something new, give us a reason to care about them. Or not, you know, I'm perfectly happy still being a hater. Obviously, the Silurians and Sea Devils have fans, but so do all Doctor Who monsters. Ask around enough and you'll find a Sensorite stan or a Croton connoisseur, but the Sea Devils specifically have always been such a black hole for me, a complete void of interest. As the wrestling world would call it, it's go away heat, or X-Pac heat. There's just nothing there. I care so little about them when they're on screen. I just kind of want them to go away. Even the Silurians have a bit more going for them, but the Sea Devils are literally a classic case of a sequel copying the original's homework, but less effectively or successfully. They somehow have even less character or presence than even the Silurians of all things. And sure, everything I mentioned in this video might be fixed or addressed with the war between the land and the sea, but I have no interest in watching it because it's a spin-off all about the worst, most boring Doctor Who monster of all time. Hell, it could actually even make them worse, since I don't trust current Doctor Who to very effectively explore a hot-button issue like ocean pollution, without tripping on its own face, again for like the 50th time in the last 5 years, and somehow blaming the individuals watching for having a plastic straw, instead of, you know, the multi-billion-dollar corporations pumping literal sewage and oil into oceans, or mass fishing entire ecosystems out of existence. And then there's little things like the fact one Witcher short story from ages ago is a better Sea Devil narrative than any Doctor Who has ever even come close to. The Sea Devils are just such a boring race, to the extent that the spin-off has had to essentially make them mermaid creatures instead of what they used to be, which, you know, try explaining what they used to be as well. There's nothing. Every story comes down to the same messaging and the same conflict, with the same outcomes. There's so many interesting things you could do with them, but nobody ever has, at least not on TV. When it comes to the rogues gallery of recurring Doctor Who monsters, I can safely say that in my opinion, at least, the Sea Devils are by far the most boring. And if it wasn't for nostalgia, they wouldn't even exist in modern Who. But as always, what do you think? Who is the most boring Doctor Who monster? How much do you disagree with me? And don't worry, this is still the closest I'll ever come to covering that spin-off, even if it turns out to be incredible. You know, I got better things to do with my Sundays. F1's still on, football's back, so everything else is my priority. So, with all that said and done, thank you very much for watching this video, and as always, see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez, my Diamond level patron, Valtar, and all my Gold level patrons, Daniel Shillito, Elliot Hodgkinson, and James Alayula Waterhouse. Thank you for supporting the channel.